Agatha Raisin and the silver thimble. Hello and welcome to Cotswold Cozy Mysteries. I'm Clara Whitfield. In Carsely, even a quilt may be less comforting than it looks, especially when every square has been cut from someone's private life. The parish has decided to stitch its history together. Old shirts, curtains, school uniforms, baby blankets and scraps carrying memories their owners may not wish explained too closely. For Agatha Raisin, the trouble begins before any crime is committed. She has brought something glamorous, expensive, and unmistakably hers. Carsely's response is to suggest putting it around the edge. Would you want your family history stitched into a village quilt? Chapter 1, splendidly urban. Agatha Raisin had spent £87 on silk in order to look effortlessly artistic. She considered this reasonable. Carsely Parish Hall was crowded with fabric squares, sewing baskets, biscuit tins of buttons, and handwritten labels explaining the histories of old curtains, work shirts, and school blazers. Agatha's contribution lay proudly on the main table. Peacock blue silk crossed with black and gold. Around it were faded cottons and carefully preserved domestic scraps. They looked authentic. Agatha's looked expensive. Mrs. Bloxby appeared with tea. "It's very striking," she said. Agatha narrowed her eyes. Striking good? Certainly. That was not quite enough. The patch parish quilt was intended for the parish wall, with every household contributing a square representing its place in village history. Naturally, Carsely had turned the idea into a competition about whose memories were respectable. Celia Venn, leader of the sewing circle, moved between the tables in a pale cardigan, quietly correcting everyone. Celia never ordered people about. Chapter 2. The centre and the border. By the following afternoon, Agatha had decided that borders were overrated. She had also decided that anyone who said otherwise was probably trying to keep somebody out. Mrs. Bloxby received this theory in the vicarage sitting-room while arranging daffodils in a blue jug. "A border can hold things together," she said. "That is exactly the sort of thing people say when they are not the border." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. Agatha sat opposite her with coffee and a cigarette, still annoyed by Saskia Threadgold's verdict. "Splendidly urban," she repeated. She might as well have said expensive and foreign. "You are from Birmingham. That is not the point." "No." Mrs. Bloxby placed another daffodil in the jug. Agatha looked suspiciously at her. "You agree with them? I think your square is very beautiful, but I think you mind rather more about where it is placed than what it represents." Agatha disliked this because it was probably true. Before she could answer, Reverend Bloxby came in carrying a cardboard folder and wearing his usual expression of mild concern. "We may have a slight problem." Agatha brightened. Problems involving other people were often restorative. "What sort?" "The layout seems to have changed. At the parish hall, the large arrangement board was covered with pinned fabric squares and handwritten labels. Some represented births, marriages, and school days. Others came from work clothes, old curtains, or garments belonging to people long dead. Saskia stood before the board with a notebook. Celia Venn stood beside her. The atmosphere was polite enough to sharpen knives on. "I only moved 3, Celia was saying. 7, Saskia replied. "Temporarily. 7 temporarily moved squares are still 7 moved squares." Celia smiled. They needed balance. Saskia pointed to Dora Fell's grey square. Why was this moved from the centre? It was visually heavy. Agatha stared at the square. It was plain grey cotton. She had never before heard plain grey cotton accused of visual aggression. Celia continued, "The centre needs warmth, and Dora's story doesn't." "That isn't what I said." "No, it rarely is." Agatha felt an involuntary flicker of admiration for Saskia. The woman was irritating, but efficient. Dora Fell entered carrying a folded shopping bag. She stopped when she saw her square, now pinned near the bottom corner. "Oh," she said. Celia turned quickly. "We're experimenting, Dora." Dora nodded. "Of course." She said it meekly, but her hand closed tightly around the handles of the bag. Saskia noticed. "So this placement wasn't agreed with you?" Dora looked from Saskia to Celia. "It doesn't matter." "It does if this is meant to be your memory." Celia sighed softly. Nobody could sigh like Celia without making the other person feel unreasonable. We cannot have 30 people negotiating every inch. Reverend Blocksby cleared his throat. I had rather imagined they might. Celia looked at him. He immediately became interested in the floor. Agatha moved closer to the board. Several labels had been rewritten in Celia's neat handwriting. One square, made from a child's old football shirt, had lost the sentence explaining that the boy had once been expelled from school. Another, cut from an old kitchen curtain, now described many happy family meals, but omitted the fact that its owner's husband had left during one of them. Saskia. Agatha said, "Did people write these labels themselves?" "Originally." Celia folded her hands. "Some were too long. Some were too honest," said Poppy Mayne from behind them. She was sitting at a sewing machine, feeding a strip of cotton under the needle. Celia ignored her. Saskia opened a cardboard folder. Inside were earlier versions of the labels. Agatha read one over Saskia's shoulder. Dora Fell, Arthur's work shirt worn at Bellington Farm until he was dismissed in 1978. The label now pinned beside Dora Square read simply, Arthur's work shirt, a reminder of years of hard work. "That is rather different," Agatha said. Dora flushed. "I told Celia it didn't matter." Saskia looked at her. "Did you tell her that before or after she changed it?" Dora's silence answered. Celia's face remained pleasant. It was an unpleasant episode. There seemed little benefit in displaying it publicly. "To whom?" Saskia asked. Nobody spoke. Marjorie Pym, who had just entered carrying a tin of shortbread, became fascinated by removing her gloves. Agatha noticed that too. Saskia closed the folder. "A community history that removes embarrassment isn't history, it's decoration." Celia's expression tightened. "We are making a quilt, not conducting an inquest. Sometimes cloth does both." That landed badly. Dora picked up her shopping bag. "I should go." Mrs. Blocksby touched her arm. "I'll walk with you." Dora gave her a grateful look. As they left, Agatha studied the grey square at the edge of the board. For the first time, her own silk border seemed less important. Only slightly less. Saskia began comparing labels again. "You have quite a system here, Celia. Someone needs one." "Yes," said Saskia, "that is usually where trouble starts." Celia gathered several loose squares and carried them to another table. Her movements were calm, but Agatha saw that her fingers were pressing too hard into the fabric. Saskia watched her go. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, "Interesting." "What is?" Agatha asked. Saskia looked at the altered labels, the moved squares and the empty central spaces. Who gets corrected? Outside, rain had begun ticking against the windows. Agatha looked again at the quilt. The village thought it was stitching together its memories. She was beginning to suspect someone had brought scissors. She merely suggested things until resistance became embarrassing. At the layout board stood Saskia Threadgold, the visiting textile historian from Cheltenham. She was elegant, attentive, and much younger than Agatha had expected. She examined fabrics with unnerving concentration, asking what curtains had once hung where, who had worn which uniform, and why certain repairs had been hidden. At one table Saskia studied Dora Fell's plain grey square. "It was my husband Arthur's work shirt," Dora said. "What work did he do?" "Various things." Saskia smiled. "Various things are often interesting." Dora said no more. Agatha noticed the exchange. She also noticed Saskia had not yet admired her silk. Then at last Saskia approached. "Oh," she said, "this is splendid." Agatha brightened. "Splendidly urban." Agatha's smile held. Saskia tilted her head. "It has tremendous confidence. I wonder if it might work particularly well as a border piece." There was a tiny silence. 3 women became intensely interested in their sewing. "A border piece," said Agatha. "It would frame the other memories beautifully." Celia appeared beside them. "I think Saskia may be right." Agatha looked at the central layout, where faded shirts and curtains apparently possessed deeper moral worth than silk from Cheltenham. "So I'm to go around the outside?" "Not you, dear," said Celia. "You're square." That was worse. Celia sat and picked up Agatha's embroidery. "We might soften these stitches slightly. They are meant to look like that." "Of course, just a tiny adjustment." From her sewing case, Celia removed a polished silver thimble. One side bore a small crescent-shaped dent. She slipped it onto her finger and corrected a stitch. Tap. The thimble touched the table. Just here. Tap. And perhaps this one. Agatha watched. Across the table, Poppy Mayne, a young red-haired seamstress with several threads clinging to her jumper, gave a small laugh. Agatha turned. Something amusing. Poppy shook her head. Only Mrs. Venn improving another person's work. Celia stopped sewing. I help where necessary. Right. We can't include everything exactly as it arrives. Poppy glanced at the layout board. No, some things might look too real. Mrs. Bloxby immediately offered biscuits. Conversation recovered. Agatha examined the board. Dora Fell's grey square sat near the centre. It was dull but somehow honest among all the carefully selected pieces. Saskia returned to it. Mrs. Fell, I'd like to hear more about this shirt. Dora lowered her eyes. Celia's thimble tapped once against the table. She was no longer sewing. Saskia looked across at her. For a moment, neither woman smiled. Then Celia said pleasantly, "Tea, Saskia?" "In a minute." Agatha looked from the silver thimble to Dora's square, and then to her own magnificent silk, already destined for the edge. She had come expecting admiration. Instead, she had discovered something much more irritating. Carsely was not merely making a quilt. It was deciding who belonged in the middle. Chapter 3, Aggressive Embroidery. Agatha spent most of Saturday morning proving that sewing was an activity designed by people with enemies. Her silk square lay on the dining table beneath a lamp. Beside it were 3 reels of thread, a pincushion, a pair of embroidery scissors, and a book entitled Simple Hand Stitching, which Agatha had already decided was fraudulent advertising. She threaded the needle. The thread slipped out. She threaded it again. The thread knotted around her thumb. Bloody ridiculous. Hodge, sitting on the windowsill, turned his head. Agatha had decided to improve her square before the next parish meeting. Not because Celia Venn had suggested it needed improvement, naturally. Agatha merely wished to demonstrate what could be achieved when a person with taste applied herself properly. She made 4 stitches. The 5th pulled the silk into a small pucker. She swore. The telephone rang. It was Sir Charles Frayth. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." "That sounds strenuous." "I'm sewing." There was a pause. Voluntarily. Agatha hung up. 20 minutes later, Charles arrived. He stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing country clothes that managed to look expensive. Despite appearing old enough to have survived 2 governments, Agatha had thread wound around her sleeve. Charles surveyed the table. "Good God! Don't start." "I wasn't going to." "You were. I was merely wondering whether embroidery normally requires restraints." Agatha tugged at the thread. It tightened around her cuff. Charles came closer. "Have you invented aggressive embroidery?" "I am repairing something." That is generally what people say shortly before throwing it away. Hodge jumped onto the table. "Get off." Agatha reached for him. Hodge stepped directly onto the silk square and sprang down again, dragging a loose thread with one paw. The square slid to the floor. Boswell appeared from nowhere and sat on it. Charles began laughing. Agatha glared at him. "You can leave." "I could, but then I'd miss the next stage." "There is no next stage." Boswell settled more comfortably. Agatha picked him up and rescued the silk. A long black thread now ran loose along one edge. She put the square back on the table and stared at it. Something bothered her. Charles poured himself coffee. "Are you planning to strangle someone with that?" "Shut up." She looked more closely. Her own stitching was clumsy but obvious. The thread crossed at slightly different angles. Some stitches pulled harder than others. A knot sat where she had tried to hide it. Celia's corrections were entirely different. Small, regular, almost invisible. Agatha turned the square over. On the back the distinction was clearer still. Her own thread wandered. Celia's followed neat, disciplined lines. "You can tell who did which bit," Agatha said. Charles glanced over. "I should think Scotland Yard could manage it." "No, look." He did. Agatha pointed. Same fabric, same colour thread, but the hands are different. Charles leaned closer. "So?" So people leave habits behind. Agatha, people leave habits behind everywhere. That is why servants know everything. She ignored him. Poppy's words returned to her. Some things might look too real, and Saskia's observation, who gets corrected. Agatha lit a cigarette and went to the window. Outside, Carsely looked offensively peaceful. Damp stone walls shone after the morning rain. A woman pushed a pram along the lane. Somewhere farther down, a lawnmower started and stopped twice. Charles picked up the simple hand-stitching book. "Your problem is tension. My problem is everybody telling me what my problem is. I meant the thread." "I know what you meant." He smiled. That irritated her more. At noon they went to the Red Lion, where Agatha found Poppy Mayne alone at a small table with soup and bread. Poppy looked wary when Agatha approached. "I'm not altering your square. I didn't ask you to." "Good." Agatha sat down anyway. Charles took the chair opposite. Poppy looked at him, then at Agatha. "Is this an interrogation?" "No." "Then it's worse." Agatha lowered her voice. "When you repair something, can you tell who stitched it?" Poppy frowned. "Often." "How?" "Needle angle, tension, knots, where someone starts and stops. Some people pull too hard, some leave slack." "Celia." Poppy gave her a long look. "You're obsessed with Mrs. Venn." "I am not." "You're a bit." Charles ordered a drink. Poppy tore off a piece of bread. "Mrs. Venn stitches very neatly, always has. She hates knots showing." And Saskia noticed that. Saskia noticed everything. There was no admiration in Poppy's voice now. "What did she notice about you?" Agatha asked. Poppy's face hardened. "That I'm good. That sounds pleasant. Not when she says it loudly in front of someone who thinks you ought to be grateful forever." Agatha understood that immediately. "Celia taught you. When I was 14. And now? Now people bring repairs to me." Poppy shrugged, but the gesture was defensive. "Some of them still tell Celia they do their own." Charles smiled faintly. "Village commerce." "Village cowardice," said Poppy. Agatha thought of Celia tapping the silver thimble against the table. Just a tiny adjustment. Poppy glanced towards the bar. Saskia told Celia the quilt looked less like Carsely every time she touched it. "When?" "Yesterday." "And Celia?" She smiled. Poppy dipped bread into her soup. That was worse than if she'd shouted. Agatha sat back. She was still angry about being relegated to the border. But the insult had started to look smaller beside something else. Saskia was not merely criticizing a quilt. She was questioning the quiet authority of the woman who decided how Carsely should remember itself. And Agatha knew enough about village life to understand that people could forgive almost anything sooner than being shown they had no right to the place they occupied. Chapter 4, The Frame Gives Way. The parish quilt preview began on Sunday evening with sherry sausage rolls and a great deal of pretending that nobody had noticed where anyone else's square had been placed. Agatha had noticed. Her peacock silk now occupied the upper border. "Very prominent," Fenella Sharp told her. "Very high," Agatha replied. Fenella laughed as though this were wit rather than complaint. The parish hall smelled of polish, damp coats and warm pastry. The unfinished quilt had been temporarily mounted on Harold Beck's large wooden display frame so people could admire the emerging design before final stitching. Harold stood nearby, watching anyone who came within 3 feet of it. "Don't lean on that." Nobody had. "Frame's sound enough," he added. "No one said it wasn't," said Agatha. Harold gave her the suspicious look of a man who considered decorative fabric an unnecessary burden on carpentry. Across the room, Saskia Threadgold was talking to Rupert Lye, the antique textile dealer. Rupert held a faded embroidered fragment between 2 fingers. "Charming," he said. "Not valuable naturally." Saskia raised an eyebrow. "Not valuable to whom?" Rupert smiled. Agatha stored the exchange away. Near the kitchen, Celia Venn was rearranging folded cloths. "Those were already put away," Poppy said. "I'm checking them." "You checked them before." Celia smiled. "One can never be too careful." Agatha caught sight of Dora Fellsgrey Square. It had returned nearer the centre, though not quite to its original place. Saskia noticed too. "Better," she said. Celia's expression remained mild. I'm glad you approve. I didn't say I approve. A few heads turned. Saskia lowered her voice, but Agatha had edged close enough to hear. You've altered 11 submissions. Improved, without permission. It is a communal piece. That doesn't make other people's memories yours. Celia folded another cloth. You are taking this rather seriously. So are you. For a second, Celia's hand stopped. Then came the familiar little smile, just trying to make everything fit. Agatha expected the silver thimble to tap the table, but Celia was not wearing it. Saskia looked towards the quilt. That may be the problem. Before Celia could answer, Reverend Blocksby called for attention and began thanking everyone involved. His speech lasted less than 2 minutes, which was one reason people liked him. Afterwards, the room loosened into small groups. Saskia approached Agatha. I hope I didn't offend you about the border. You did. Saskia blinked. Most people in Carsely preferred resentment diluted by several days of smiling. Agatha did not. Then Saskia laughed. Fair enough. You meant it as an insult. No, I meant that your square doesn't pretend to be anything else. Agatha hesitated. Saskia looked towards the layout. Half these pieces have been edited into respectability. Yours hasn't. That almost sounds like a compliment. It is. Agatha found herself unexpectedly pleased. Saskia lowered her voice. This quilt is getting interesting. Because of Celia. Because of everybody. She glanced at Dora, Marjorie, Rupert and Fenella in turn. Old fabric is dangerous. People think it only remembers weddings and babies. And what does it remember? Who had money? Who didn't? Who repaired instead of replaced? Who worked for whom? Who was dismissed? Who inherited? Who lied? That seems rather a lot for curtains. You'd be surprised. Saskia picked up her handbag. I'm meeting someone before I leave. Who? Saskia smiled. You ask questions like a policeman. Better dressed. Saskia laughed again and walked away. It was the last time Agatha saw her alive. By 9:30, Agatha was at the Red Lion with Charles, waiting impatiently for Saskia. She said she might come for a drink, Agatha said. Perhaps she changed her mind. She was meeting someone. So now she's late. Charles drank his whiskey. People are allowed to be late without being murdered. You always say things like that, just before something happens. No, I don't. Agatha checked the door again. At 10 minutes to 10, Reverend Blocksby entered the pub looking pale. Agatha? She stood at once. What? It's Saskia. The parish hall felt entirely different when they returned. The cheerful lights were still on. Half-drunk cups of tea remained on tables. A plate of sausage rolls had been covered with a tea towel. Near the display frame, the storage steps lay on their side. Saskia had been found beneath part of the fallen wooden frame. Nothing gruesome was visible. That made it worse. Bill Wong arrived from Mercester shortly afterwards, and began clearing everyone back. No theories yet, Agatha. I haven't said anything. You were about to. He crouched beside one of the frame's supports. Harold Beck hovered nearby. I built that properly. Bill looked up. I'm not accusing you. The hook didn't come loose by itself. That silenced several people. Bill examined the metal fitting where the frame had pulled away. Something small was caught there. A strand of violet thread. Poppy, standing near the door, looked down at her own jumper. There was violet thread on her sleeve. Agatha saw Celia notice it. Then Celia said softly, Someone must have pulled the frame carelessly. Bill looked at her. Perhaps. Celia folded her hands. Agatha stared at the fallen steps, the loosened hook, and that single violet strand. Earlier that evening, Saskia had said the quilt remembered who repaired, who replaced, and who lied. Now somebody had turned the parish hall's proudest display into what looked very much like an accident. Agatha no longer believed it was one. Chapter 5. The girl with thread on her sleeve. By Monday morning, Carsely had established 3 facts about Saskia Threadgold's death. The police had established none of them. According to the queue in the village shop, Saskia had been murdered, Poppy Mayne had done it, and young people no longer possessed either patience or proper sewing baskets. Agatha entered halfway through this judgment. Nancy Pargeter was serving behind the counter, while pretending not to listen. That violet thread is what I can't get past. Marjorie Pym was saying. "You could if you tried," said Agatha. Marjorie turned. "Oh, Agatha, we weren't discussing—" "Yes, you were." Silence briefly improved the shop. Poppy's name had travelled quickly because she provided Carsely with everything it liked in a suspect. Youth, ambition, untidy hair, and visible irritation. She argued with Saskia, Fenella Sharp said. So did half the parish hall. Yes, but Poppy gets emotional. Agatha picked up a packet of cigarettes. Unlike you lot, obviously. Nancy coughed into her hand. Fenella coloured. I only meant Saskia was talking about giving Poppy a larger role. Marjorie leaned closer. Celia practically raised that girl in sewing terms. There was something impressive about turning embroidery lessons into parenthood. Agatha paid. What did Poppy supposedly gain by killing the woman who wanted to promote her? Marjorie hesitated. Well, perhaps Saskia changed her mind. Did she? No. Excellent theory. Agatha should have stopped there. Instead, she remembered Poppy's violet-threaded sleeve, the strand at the frame hook, Poppy's resentment towards Celia, her brittle answers in the Red Lion. It fitted rather too easily. That was the danger. But Agatha's pride had been bruised by the quilt, and she understood resentment very well just then. She could imagine Poppy being praised, then patronised, then becoming furious when Saskia interfered once too often. Nancy handed Agatha her change. I saw Celia moving things again on Sunday. The others looked at her. What things? Agatha asked. Squares before the preview. Nancy shrugged. She said she was tidying. Marjorie relaxed immediately. Oh, Celia is always tidying. Yes, said Fenella, that hardly means anything. Agatha looked from one woman to another. Apparently moving other people's work around without permission was harmless if one did it in a cardigan. Outside, Poppy Mayne was loading a sewing machine into the back of a small car. Agatha followed her. Poppy. Poppy turned. What now? Bill will want to know about the thread. He already does. And I use violet thread. That isn't an answer. Poppy shoved the machine farther into the boot. It's mending thread. Strong stuff. Half my kit is full of it. Were you near the frame after the preview? No. Did you go back into the hall? No. Did you argue with Saskia? Poppy slammed the boot. Yes. Agatha had not expected the admission. What about? She wanted me to take over more of the finishing work. That sounds favourable. To me, not to Celia. And you objected? I objected to being discussed like a new sewing machine. Poppy folded her arms. Saskia said talent mattered more than seniority. Celia said experience mattered more than fashion. Then Saskia told me not to let gratitude become obedience. Agatha remembered those words. They sounded exactly like something Saskia would say. And you got angry. Yes. At Saskia. At everybody. A delivery van rattled past. Poppy waited until it had gone. Does being angry make me a murderer? No. You sound disappointed. Agatha stiffened. I am asking questions. You're choosing answers. That struck unpleasantly close. Poppy opened the car door. Agatha noticed a small tear near the cuff of her jumper. The edge was snagged. Violet thread clung there. Where did that tear happen? Poppy looked down. No idea. At the hall? Could have. Near the frame. Poppy's expression changed. Not fear exactly. Wariness. You wanted to be me because I'm messy. That is ridiculous. Is it? Poppy got into the car and drove away. Agatha stood by the curb feeling both offended and slightly exposed. At lunchtime she met Bill Wong outside the parish hall. He had a notebook tucked under one arm. Poppy admits arguing with Saskia, Agatha said. So do several people. She uses violet mending thread. So do several people. She had it on her sleeve. Bill looked at her. Agatha. What? You're building the same case the village is building. That doesn't mean it's wrong. No, but it means you should be careful. Inside, the quilt remained covered with a white sheet, while police examined the frame. Harold Beck stood beside the wall, complaining quietly about people touching his fittings. Celia was at the far table sorting fabric into neat piles. She looked tired but composed. Terrible business, she said. Agatha nodded. Celia picked up a plain square, smoothed it and placed it in a basket. "Still? We mustn't let everything fall apart." Her voice was soft, competent, reassuring. Exactly the sort of voice Carsely trusted. Agatha watched her move another square. Then another. Each one disappeared into the basket under her hand. For tidying. No one objected. And yet, as Agatha looked towards the covered frame, she found herself thinking not about Celia, but about Poppy's torn sleeve. The village had chosen its suspect. Agatha was beginning, against her better judgment, to choose the same one. Chapter 6. The Thimble in the Basket. The parish hall reopened on Tuesday with the peculiar air of a room, pretending nothing important had happened in it. The fallen frame had been removed. The storage steps stood against the wall again. Someone had put fresh daffodils on the window-sill, which Agatha considered an optimistic use of flowers. Celia Venn had called a small meeting to discuss whether the quilt should be completed. It would be what Saskia wanted, she said. Agatha doubted anyone knew what Saskia wanted any more, but the sentence had the advantage of sounding generous. Poppy had not come. Neither had Dora Fell. Mrs. Blocksby sat beside a basket of unfinished squares, while Reverend Blocksby made tea in the kitchen. Agatha wandered towards the sewing table. Celia's things were arranged with irritating neatness: scissors, needles, chalk, reels of cotton, pins sorted by size. Then Agatha saw the silver thimble. It lay inside a shallow wicker basket among spare bobbins. She picked it up. The crescent-shaped dent was unmistakable. Celia noticed. "Oh, there it is. You lost it. I thought I had." Celia held out her hand. Agatha did not immediately return it. "When? Sunday evening, I suppose. Before Saskia died." Celia's smile faded slightly. "I really couldn't say." Mrs. Blocksby looked up. Agatha turned the thimble between her fingers. Inside the dent, almost invisible against the silver, something violet was caught. A fibre, very small. Agatha's pulse quickened. She carried the thimble closer to the window. Celia followed. "What are you doing?" "There's thread caught in it. There is always thread caught in thimbles. Violet thread." Celia gave a little laugh. "We've used dozens of colours." Agatha looked towards the place where the frame had stood. The police had found violet thread near the loosened hook. That did not prove anything. Celia sewed constantly. Still, the coincidence had teeth. Bill Wong arrived 10 minutes later. Agatha intercepted him before he had taken off his coat. "Look!" She placed the thimble in his palm. Bill inspected it. A thimble, inside the dent. He moved nearer the light. "I see it. Violet." "Yes." The thread at the frame was violet. "Yes." Agatha waited. Bill did not gasp. "You're being very calm. I'm a policeman. You could try looking interested." "I am interested." He slipped the thimble carefully into a small evidence bag. Celia, watching from across the room, stiffened. "Surely that isn't necessary." Bill looked at her. "It may be nothing. I use violet mending thread all the time." Agatha turned. "You do? Of course. It's strong." That annoyed Agatha. She had wanted the violet thread to belong uniquely to Poppy. Bill noticed her expression. "Several people in the sewing group use it," he said. Agatha felt her theory become less elegant. Celia folded her arms. "If that is all, I should like my thimble returned when you've finished with it." "My mother gave it to me." There was real feeling in her voice, and for a moment Agatha felt almost ashamed. Almost. That evening, back at her cottage, she spread her silk square across the dining table again. Hodge jumped onto a chair. Boswell occupied the rug. Agatha examined the stitches under the lamp. Celia's repairs remained neat and regular. She ran a finger over one line. Then Hodge reached for a loose thread hanging from a scrap beside the sewing box. He hooked it with one claw and pulled. The thread dragged sideways against the edge of the fabric before snapping free. Agatha stared. The fibres where it had rubbed were flattened in one direction. She took another scrap and pulled thread straight through it. Different mark. She tried again, pressing the thread sideways with the blunt side of a teaspoon. Again the fibres flattened. Agatha sat back. "Interesting." Hodge looked unimpressed. The telephone rang. Mrs. Blocksby. "Agatha, are you all right?" "Yes." "Why? You were rather quiet when you left." "I was thinking." "That can sometimes make you quiet." Agatha ignored this. "Does Celia always use the thimble on the same finger?" Mrs. Blocksby paused. "I believe so." "And how does she push the needle?" "What an extraordinary question." "Humour me." Mrs. Blocksby considered. "With the side, I think." "Not the tip." "No, she once said the dent catches the thread if she pushes straight." Agatha looked at her silk square. The crescent-shaped dent. The violet fibre. The flattened thread. A habit. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone would remember, because everyone had seen it too often. "Mrs. Blocksby," Agatha said slowly, "when Celia adjusts things, does she always sew the same way?" "I suppose she does." "Exactly." After the call, Agatha lit a cigarette and stood by the window. She still believed Poppy might be hiding something. The torn sleeve bothered her. So did the argument with Saskia. But the thimble bothered her more, not because it was silver, not because it had been found in Celia's basket, because a small dent had forced Celia to change the way she used her hand. And hands, Agatha was beginning to understand, were much harder to teach manners than faces. Chapter 7, Agatha Picks the Wrong Seam. The emergency meeting at the Red Lion was described by Fenella Sharp as informal, which meant that 40 people attended, and 3 of them brought minutes. The question was whether the parish quilt should be completed. The actual subject was Poppy Mayne. Agatha knew this before she had removed her coat. Conversation stopped around her, then resumed in lower voices. Poppy sat alone near the fireplace, arms folded tightly. Celia Venn occupied a chair beside Mrs. Blocksby, looking pale and dignified without appearing to have practised either. Fenella tapped a teaspoon against a glass. We must decide whether continuing would be respectful. "To whom?" asked Poppy. Fenella blinked. "To Saskia. You barely knew her. That hardly seems relevant." "It seems extremely relevant." Celia murmured, "Poppy, perhaps tonight isn't the time." Poppy gave her a hard look. "And when would be convenient?" Agatha felt the room lean against the girl. Not physically. Carsely was subtler than that. Marjorie Pym sighed. Someone whispered that Poppy had always been difficult. Another woman mentioned the argument with Saskia, loudly enough to be overheard and softly enough to deny intending it. Agatha had spent the afternoon thinking about the violet thread. She had also spent it remembering Poppy's torn sleeve, her temper and her resentment of Celia. The dented thimble troubled her. But Celia's explanation was plausible. She used violet mending thread frequently. Poppy used it too. And unlike Celia, Poppy had admitted being furious. Agatha stood. Mrs. Blocksby looked alarmed. That should have warned her. "I think," Agatha said, "we're all avoiding something obvious." Poppy stared at her. Bill Wong, standing near the bar, slowly lowered his coffee. Agatha continued. Saskia encouraged Poppy, but she also interfered in her relationship with Celia. There was an argument. Poppy had violet thread on her clothes, and part of her sleeve was found snagged near the display area. Poppy went white. "That isn't what the police said." "You told me yourself you didn't know where it tore." "I said it could have happened at the hall." And Saskia was threatening to change the whole sewing hierarchy. Charles, beside Agatha, muttered, "Agatha." She ignored him. "You were angry. You stayed later than you first admitted. I went back for my scissors, and perhaps you confronted Saskia." Poppy pushed back her chair. "So now I killed her." The pub had become completely silent. Agatha heard herself say, "I think you may have tampered with the frame." The instant the words were out, she knew she had gone too far. Poppy's face changed. Anger vanished. That was worse. "You think I killed someone because my jumper is untidy?" "That isn't what I said." "It's exactly what you said, only with more words." Celia rose. "Poppy, please." "Don't." Poppy grabbed her coat. Marjorie Pym looked away. Fenella became intensely interested in the meeting papers. Poppy stopped at the door and looked back at Agatha. Mrs. Green cancelled 2 repair jobs this morning. Mrs. Pym cancelled another. Now everyone can say they were right. Marjorie flushed. "I merely thought it better to wait." "Of course you did." Poppy left. The door closed. Mrs. Blocksby looked at Agatha. There was no anger in her expression, only disappointment. Agatha preferred anger. Bill came over. Outside. I'm not a schoolgirl. Then don't make me sound like a headmaster. They stepped into the cold evening. Rain had left the village street shining beneath the lamps. Bill faced her. You didn't ask me before doing that. You wouldn't have told me anything. I would have told you enough to stop you. Agatha folded her arms. The thread doesn't put Poppy at the frame. It was on her sleeve. Yes, we know how it got there. Agatha stopped. Bill continued. 2 people remember Poppy helping with your square during the preview. Celia had temporarily basted part of the border positioning with violet mending thread. It tangled around your silk. Poppy pulled it free, Agatha remembered. Barely. She had been too busy complaining about where her square had been placed. Poppy had bent over it, muttered something about unnecessary temporary stitching, and tugged loose a violet strand. Agatha had not considered it important. She got the thread from me, from helping you. The humiliation was exquisite. And the torn sleeve, caught on a chair bracket. Harold found a matching fibre. Agatha lit a cigarette, because otherwise she might have shouted. Bill watched her. You started with Poppy because she looked like the sort of person who leaves evidence behind. That's unfair, is it? Agatha thought of the village shop. Young, untidy, ambitious, visible mess. She had disliked their reasoning, and then borrowed it. Bill softened slightly. You're good at seeing what people hide, Agatha. But sometimes you decide the person who looks wrong must be wrong. She stared into the wet road. And Celia's thimble, we're checking it. That means you think it matters. It means we're checking it. Infuriating man. Inside the pub, the meeting continued without her. Agatha could see Poppy's empty chair through the window. Mrs. Bloxby came outside. Poppy will recover, she said. That is not especially comforting. No. Agatha waited for reassurance. None came. I made a fool of myself. Yes, thank you. Mrs. Bloxby touched her arm. But perhaps an useful one. Agatha frowned. Mrs. Bloxby glanced towards the pub. Everyone was so willing to believe Poppy, because her anger was untidy. Agatha thought of Celia, always composed, always helpful, always making tiny adjustments. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it beneath her shoe. For once, her embarrassment did not make her want to defend herself. It made her want to start again. Chapter 8. The Dealer's Good Eye. Agatha apologized to Poppy the next morning. Not gracefully. Graceful apologies required preparation, and Agatha had none. I was wrong, she said. Poppy, standing behind the counter of a small alterations shop in Mercester, looked up from a pair of trousers. Yes, I accused you without enough evidence. Yes, I've said I was wrong. You have. Agatha waited. Poppy returned to pinning the trousers. Are you going to make this difficult? I lost 3 customers. Agatha winced. I'll put that right. How? I'll think of something. Poppy gave her a look suggesting. This was precisely the sort of sentence that had caused trouble in the first place. Agatha left feeling only slightly improved. Outside, Sir Charles was waiting beside his car. How did the grovelling go? I did not grovel. No, I imagine that would have caused structural damage. Agatha got into the car. Their destination was Cheltenham, where Rupert Lye conducted his antique textile business from 2 elegant rooms above a shop selling expensive lamps. Rupert greeted them in a velvet jacket, and an expression of professional sorrow. Poor Saskia, such an appalling business. You disliked her, said Agatha. Rupert smiled. I dislike many people. It keeps life varied. His rooms were lined with folded quilts, framed embroidery, and glass cases containing scraps of fabric priced more highly than some furniture. Agatha picked up a small linen fragment. Rupert immediately removed it from her hand. 14th century. It looks like an old dishcloth. That is why God invented experts. Charles wandered towards a cabinet. Agatha sat opposite Rupert. Saskia accused you of cheating villagers. Such an ugly word. Undervaluing, then. Better. You told people valuable pieces were ordinary, so you could buy them cheaply. Rupert spread his hands. I am a dealer. I buy below the price at which I intend to sell. You told Marjorie Pym her linen was worthless. That particular linen is nearly worthless. Agatha smiled to spite herself. She says it has been in her family for generations. It was in a Gloucestershire estate sale 6 months ago. Charles coughed to disguise a laugh. So Saskia knew what you were doing? Agatha asked. She knew what everyone was doing. Rupert's amusement faded. That was her great talent and her worst habit. She threatened you. She threatened to tell several donors what their textiles were actually worth. That could have cost you money. Yes. You were seen near Carsely after you claimed you'd left. I stopped at a client's house outside the village. Convenient. True. Rupert rose and took a folder from a desk. He showed Agatha an invoice signed and dated on Sunday evening. There, 8:45. Charles examined it. This client exists, unlike some of Marjorie Pym's ancestors, yes. Agatha ignored him. Could you have returned to the parish hall afterwards? Possibly. I did not. It was maddeningly plausible. Agatha had hoped Rupert might become the neat solution she needed after the disaster with Poppy. Greed valuable fabric, Saskia threatening exposure. It all fitted comfortably. Perhaps too comfortably. She told Rupert about the violet strand caught near the frame hook. He became interested. What sort of thread? Mending thread, apparently. Apparently? Strong violet cotton. Rupert leaned back. Then why is everyone calling it embroidery thread? Agatha frowned. Is there a difference? Rupert looked wounded. Mrs. Raisin. Fine. Explain. Embroidery thread is chosen to be seen. Mending thread is chosen to hold. He picked up 2 reels from a drawer. One was soft and glossy, the other tightly twisted. A strong mending cotton can temporarily secure heavy fabric, hems, bindings, even fittings if someone is improvising. Fittings? Not properly, obviously. But one might use it to hold something in position before fastening it. Agatha thought of the frame hook. Could it hold weight? For a little while. And then fail? Rupert looked at her. If that is what someone intended. Charles stopped examining a tapestry. Agatha felt the false solution beginning to split open. Rupert might steal value from cloth, but the thread at the frame was not about value. It was about handling, repair, temporary adjustment. They returned to Carsely and went directly to the parish hall storage cupboard. Bill Wong was already there. You two again. We've been useful, said Agatha. Charles nodded. I mostly drove. Agatha pointed at several reels stored beside spare needles. Which violet thread did the police take? Bill indicated an empty space in the sewing box. Same brand used by both Poppy and Celia. Agatha picked up a similar reel. Strong, plain, functional. Not decorative at all. Someone used it to hold the hook temporarily, she said. Then arranged things so it would give way. Bill regarded her more seriously. That is one possibility. Rupert says it would work. Rupert also sells old handkerchiefs for hundreds of pounds. He was right about Marjorie's linen. Bill almost smiled. Agatha looked deeper into the cupboard. Several fabric squares had been stacked separately. Dora's grey square lay on top. Beneath it were the football shirt square, the kitchen curtain square, and 2 others whose labels had been altered. All the awkward stories. All removed together. Charles looked over her shoulder. That seems rather selective. Agatha touched the edge of Dora's square. Rupert had wanted valuable fabric, but none of these pieces was valuable. Not in money. Their danger lay elsewhere. They made people uncomfortable. Agatha remembered Saskia saying that the quilt became less like Carsely every time Celia touched it. She thought of Poppy's visible temper, and Celia's invisible authority. Then of the silver thimble, its crescent dent, and that tiny violet fibre. Her mistake had been looking for somebody who wanted something from the quilt. Money, work recognition. Perhaps the killer wanted the opposite. Perhaps she wanted certain things kept out of it entirely. Chapter 9, just a tiny adjustment. Mrs. Bloxby was making scones when Agatha arrived at the vicarage, with Dora Fell's grey square under one arm. "You've stolen part of the quilt," Mrs. Bloxby observed. "Borrowed." Did Bill agree? He didn't actively stop me. Mrs. Bloxby decided not to pursue this distinction. On the kitchen table, Agatha spread out photographs of the altered squares, copies of the original labels, and several samples of violet mending thread. She placed Dora's square in the middle. "This one embarrasses somebody," she said. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea. Arthur's dismissal. "From Bellington Farm." Mrs. Bloxby nodded. The farm belonged to Marjorie Pym's uncle at the time. Agatha stared at her. "You knew?" "Only that Arthur was accused of taking tools. He always denied it, and Marjorie's wonderful family history becomes slightly less wonderful." "Yes." Agatha examined the rewritten label. Years of hard work. Nothing about dismissal. Nothing about accusation. Nothing awkward enough to spoil the picture. And Celia removed it. She said she was protecting Dora. She was protecting the quilt she wanted. Mrs. Bloxby sat opposite. That may amount to the same thing in Celia's mind. Agatha thought of Celia moving squares outward, rewriting labels, smoothing away quarrels and poverty. She wasn't just organising fabric. She was deciding which Carsely counted. Saskia understood that, and intended to expose it. Mrs. Bloxby broke open a scone. She also had plans for an article. Agatha looked up. "What article?" Reverend Bloxby found a note Saskia left among the project papers. She was going to write about the quilt. Using the villagers? Apparently. Agatha frowned. So Saskia had not been entirely noble. She had wanted to reveal Celia's manipulation, but she had also intended to turn Carsely's secrets into copy. That made her death no less wrong. It simply made her more human. Agatha gathered the thread samples. There's still the frame. Mrs. Bloxby looked at them. Celia was forever repairing things. Exactly. Agatha picked up a needle. "Show me how she uses her thimble." Mrs. Bloxby hesitated, then mimicked the motion. Sideways, mostly, like this. She pushed the needle with the side of her middle finger. "Why?" "The dent." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. She once complained that if she pushed straight on, thread caught in the crescent. So she learned to angle her hand. Agatha became still. There it was. Not merely a thimble containing violet fibre. A habit. She took a piece of mending thread and rubbed it sideways beneath the spoon handle, imitating pressure from a curved metal edge. The thread flattened on one side. They compared it with a photograph Bill had allowed Agatha to see of the strand, recovered from the frame hook. The fibres had the same rubbed, flattened appearance near one end. Mrs. Bloxby looked troubled. That could still be coincidence. Yes. Agatha disliked the word, but respected it. She needed more. They went to the parish hall. Bill Wong was there with Harold Beck, examining the empty wall where the display frame had hung. Harold was pointing at fittings. "I've told you that hook was sound." Bill saw Agatha. "No, I haven't said anything. You brought Mrs. Bloxby. That means you're confident. I'm developing confidence." Agatha handed him the thread sample. "Celia doesn't push needles straight. She angles her thimble because of the dent. It rubs thread flat along one side." Bill studied it. "We already found compression on the recovered strand. From a metal edge? Possibly. From Celia's metal edge? Possibly," Bill repeated. Agatha wanted to shake him. Instead she turned to Harold. If someone temporarily tied the frame hook with mending thread, would they need to hold the thread tightly while fastening it? Of course. With one hand? Probably. And if they were used to pushing and tightening thread, with a thimble? Harold frowned. Well, that'd be foolish. Why? Metal slips. Unless you had done it for years. Harold looked towards the sewing tables. Celia entered at that moment, carrying a box of labels. "Are we still investigating carpentry?" Her tone was light. Agatha watched her set down the box. Tap. Her bare middle finger touched the tabletop, where the thimble would normally have been. A ghost of the habit. "Celia," Agatha said, "when did you put the clean cloth basket away on Sunday?" Celia blinked. "I told the police." "During the preview. Before Saskia stayed behind." "Yes. And afterwards?" "I folded the remaining cloths in the kitchen." Mrs. Bloxby spoke quietly. "But there weren't any." Celia looked at her. "What?" "I put the last clean cloths away before Reverend Bloxby's speech. The basket was empty. A tiny pause. Agatha felt everything tighten. Celia smiled. "I may be remembering another evening." "Perhaps," said Agatha. Bill wrote something down. Celia looked at him. It was a dreadful night. "Surely nobody remembers every minute correctly." "No," Bill said, "but we ask." Celia picked up the box again. "Then ask someone else." She walked towards the layout board. Agatha followed with her eyes. Celia paused before Dora's grey square, now restored near the centre. Her mouth tightened. Only for a second. Then she moved it 2 inches to the left. "Better balance," she murmured. Agatha looked at Mrs. Blocksby. Mrs. Blocksby looked back. Just a tiny adjustment. Agatha suddenly understood the scale of Celia's need. The quilt was not merely a project to her. It was proof that she still mattered. For years she had mended hems, repaired school uniforms, altered curtains, taught girls to sew, finished other people's work, and quietly decided what was acceptable. Then Saskia had arrived and named the thing Celia could not bear to hear. Control. Poppy was replacing her in practical skill. Saskia was challenging her authority. The quilt, her great public achievement, was beginning to display the very stories she had spent years smoothing away. Agatha approached the layout. "You know what Saskia saw, don't you?" Celia did not turn. "She saw a quilt. She saw your version of Carsely." Celia adjusted another square. "That is what editing is." "No editing is what Saskia planned to do in her article. You were doing something rather more personal." Celia's hand stopped. Agatha did not press further. Not yet. She had learned something from Poppy. An accusation made too early could become a gift to the guilty. So Agatha merely smiled. Tomorrow's final meeting should be interesting. Celia finally looked at her. For once there was no softness in her face. Agatha knew then that she had found the right seam. She only had to pull it carefully enough for the whole pattern to show. Chapter 10, the square in the centre. The final quilt meeting drew more people than the preview had. Murder improved attendance. Carsely Parish Hall was packed with villagers standing beneath the unfinished quilt, pretending they had come to support the project rather than witness an exposure. Dorafell's grey square had been restored near the centre. Agatha's peacock silk still occupied the border. For once she did not mind. Poppy Mayne stood near the back with her arms folded. She had nearly refused to come. Agatha approached her before the meeting began. "I owe you something. You already apologized." Privately. Poppy looked suspicious. Agatha turned towards the room. "Everyone, before we start." Conversation faded. Agatha disliked public apologies almost as much as public weigh-ins, but there was no avoiding this one. "I accused Poppy Mayne of killing Saskia Threadgold." Several people suddenly studied the floor. "I was wrong. Worse, I used the same lazy reasoning half this village was using. Poppy was angry, untidy and ambitious, so we decided that made her dangerous." Marjorie Pym shifted uncomfortably. Agatha continued. "The violet thread on Poppy's sleeve came from helping me with my own square. The tear in her jumper came from a chair fitting. I should have checked before opening my mouth." Charles, beside the wall, murmured, "Historic occasion." Agatha glared at him. Poppy almost smiled. Then Agatha turned towards Celia Venn. Celia stood beside the quilt table, calm and pale. "Can we get on with finishing Saskia's work?" "No," said Agatha, "because Saskia wasn't doing the work you wanted her to do." Celia's expression changed very slightly. Bill Wong stood near the door. He said nothing. Agatha picked up Dora's grey square. Saskia discovered that several contributions had been moved, altered or rewritten. Plain things were pushed outward. Embarrassing stories disappeared. Anything too modern, shabby or inconvenient was improved. Celia sighed. "We have discussed this. Yes, you called them tiny adjustments." Agatha set the grey square down. Saskia planned to write about it, not entirely out of kindness either. She intended to use Carsley's private stories in an article. But she had also understood something important. Agatha looked around the room. This quilt wasn't becoming the village's memory. It was becoming Celia's approved version of the village. A murmur passed through the hall. Celia lifted her chin. "I was trying to stop the thing becoming ugly." "There you are," said Agatha. "What?" "That." Celia stared at her. "Ugly." Agatha pointed towards Dora's square. Arthur Fell's dismissal was ugly. A child being expelled was ugly. A husband walking out over supper was ugly. Poppy taking over repair work from you was probably ugly too, in a different way. Poppy's face hardened. Celia said, "That is absurd. No, you have spent years being the woman who fixes things. Torn hems, curtains, school uniforms, other people's mistakes." Agatha paused. And then Saskia came here and started telling everyone that the repairs themselves mattered, that the rough edges should stay visible. Celia's hands tightened. Agatha saw it. "So you stayed behind after the preview." "I was folding cloths." "No, you weren't." Mrs. Bloxby spoke gently from the front row. The clean cloth basket had already been put away. Celia looked at her. For the first time genuine anger showed, only a flash. But Carsely saw it. Agatha continued. "You used strong violet mending thread to hold the loosened display hook temporarily. The frame appeared secure until enough pressure was placed on it." Harold Beck muttered. "That would do it. You arranged the storage steps, then made the frame look as though it had simply failed." Celia shook her head. "Anyone could have used that thread." "True." Bill moved slightly closer. Agatha held up a clear evidence bag containing the silver thimble. "But not everyone uses this." The hall became very quiet. The crescent-shaped dent caught the light. Celia stared at it. Agatha said, "The dent catches thread if you push straight against it. So for years you've used the side of the thimble instead." Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "You angle your hand," Agatha continued. "That habit rubs thread flat in a particular way. The violet strand recovered from the frame hook shows the same flattened pressure mark." Celia said nothing. "And the fibre caught inside the dent matches the same kind of mending thread." Her face had gone colourless. Agatha placed the thimble on the table. "Everyone ignored the way you used it, because everyone had seen you do it 1,000 times. Tap, just a tiny adjustment." Agatha looked at the quilt. "That was your mistake. You thought ordinary habits were invisible." Celia's composure broke, though not dramatically. She sat down. Saskia was going to destroy everything. "No," Agatha said. "She was going to expose what you had done." She didn't understand this village. She understood enough. Celia looked towards Poppy. "She came in here for a few days and decided that girl should replace me." Poppy flinched. "I never asked to replace you." "No, you didn't have to." Celia's voice became bitter. "You all came to me for years. Alter this. Mend that, save this dress. Fix this curtain. Then suddenly I was the interfering old woman who couldn't leave things alone," Mrs. Bloxby said softly. "Helping people did not give you ownership of them." Celia closed her eyes. Bill stepped forward. The rest happened quietly. There was no struggle. Carsely preferred its disasters controlled where possible. Later, after statements had been taken, and people had exhausted themselves by saying they had always had doubts about Celia, the quilt remained spread across the tables. Poppy stood beside Dora. "Where do you want yours?" Dora touched the grey square, where it was meant to go, near the centre. Nobody objected. Agatha picked up her own silk square. Poppy looked at it. "You know, the border actually suits it." Agatha stared at her. Then she laughed. "Don't push your luck." Together they pinned it into place. The silk caught the afternoon light around the older, rougher fabrics. For once Agatha did not feel excluded. A border, she decided, was not always where unwanted things were sent. Sometimes it was simply another part of the pattern. Carsely finished the parish quilt, although it was rather less tidy than Celia Venn had intended. Dora Fell's plain grey square remained close to the centre. Several villagers soon began claiming they had always thought it one of the most moving contributions. The silver thimble had protected a finger through years of careful sewing, yet its small crescent dent preserved something more revealing than any polished surface could hide. Pressure, repetition, and habit. Perhaps communities do look prettier when their awkward pieces are trimmed away. They are rarely kinder for it. Back at her cottage, Agatha put her silk square in a drawer, reconsidered, and placed it where the light could catch the peacock colours. Hodge immediately sat on it. It was not admiration, but it was attention. "Would you have noticed the dent in the silver thimble?" Or would you have blamed the girl with thread on her sleeve? Thank you for joining me, Clara Whitfield, for Cotswold Cozy Mysteries. Do tell me which clue first made you suspicious, and whether you would have trusted Celia's endless little adjustments. In Carsely, nothing stays perfectly arranged for long, and when the last thread is tied off, Agatha Raisin has learned that a silver thimble may protect a finger, but it cannot protect a lie.